My name is Eric Fesko, and I'm one of the pastors here at Christ Pres, and this is it. You've reached the last installment on our series on John, which started with a study on his gospel called Bear Witness to the Light, then concluded with a 6-week lesson on his epistles called Walk in the Light. And this is week 6 of 6. You've made it to the end. Now, let me throw out a disclaimer right from the start. Last time I taught, I was asked to cover all of chapter 4 in 1 John. And then the video ended up going some 25 minutes. My apologies. That's a little longer than we usually like to do for these videos and accompanying audio. But today, I've been asked to cover 2 entire books of the Bible, all of 2nd and 3rd John. We might be here a while, so grab a snack, get comfortable. Actually, I'll try and still keep it brief. 2nd and 3rd John are actually quite literally the shortest books in the entire Bible. In fact, if you combined 2nd and 3rd John, that would still only make it the 5th shortest book in the Bible. They're each only 1 chapter, and to boot, they touch on a lot of the very same themes that we've already talked about in 1 John. So here's how I'll take us through this. I'm going to hit a few of the highlights from both 2nd and 3rd John, and then we'll circle back around talking about the subject of the antichrist, which I know I've been teasing you for a few weeks now. I'll try and tie it all together. So first things first. In 2nd and 3rd John, the writer of those letters identifies himself as the elder. This is the Apostle John. And he's writing to someone he identifies in 2nd John as the elect lady. Now you might wonder, who is this mysterious lady? Well, it's not a single lady, but it likely refers to a specific local church. In 1 John, he was writing to a series of churches, a group of churches. This one, he's likely in 2nd John writing to one specific local church. And after his greeting in 2nd John, he gets right into covering some of the very same things that we discussed in 1 John. He touches on 2 themes he covered extensively in that letter, specifically walking according to the commandments and then loving one another. 2 very familiar themes from 1 John. So that's the top half of the book of 2nd John. And then he gets into the nitty-gritty, again, very much related to what he told us in 1 John. The impetus behind writing 1 John, you have to remember this, it's very important. His whole reason for writing 1 John was because of false teaching, okay? False teaching. There were teachers infiltrating the church who didn't believe that Jesus came in the flesh. Now, it's one thing to believe that Jesus didn't come in the flesh. That's problematic. That's problematic in and of itself. It's a false gospel if you don't believe that Jesus came in the flesh. But it's much worse when it's coming to the church in the form of a teacher, because that teacher is now spreading something false to a broader audience. So Jesus talks about these false teachers who have gone out into the world, he says, which is interesting language. Language he also uses in 1st and 2nd John, or in 1 John chapters 2 and 4, I meant to say. The apostles were told to go out into the world and preach the truth. Okay? And then John is saying of these false teachers that they have gone out into the world to teach lies. It's almost as if he's saying these false teachers have gone out into the world in the same manner that the apostles have gone out into the world, only their evangelical mission is one of lies, not preaching the truth. They're not emissaries of Christ, they're emissaries of the devil. And it's in 2nd John verse 7 where he brings up, once again, this antichrist language. And with it, he brings up a warning. He says, watch out. Watch out for these false teachers. Watch out for these people. Watch out for them lest you, and then he says, lose what you have worked for. Okay? Now, what does John mean by that? Watch out for these false teachers or we lose what we've worked for. First and foremost, understand he's not talking about salvation here. That might be your first inclination to think, is he talking about being saved? And I remind you, your salvation is kept in heaven. It's locked up in heaven. That's what we're told in 1 Peter 1:5. It's locked up for us and guarded. You won't lose your salvation, okay? But remember, John is talking to a church. He's talking to a church. And we know there are distinctions to be made between healthy and unhealthy churches. healthy and unhealthy churches. You really have to work. You have to work hard to have a healthy church. And all it takes is some bad teaching to bring about division, jealousy, that kind of behavior, and a behavior that's unbecoming of the Church of Jesus Christ. A little false teaching spreads as leaven spreads through the bread, okay? And it just, like a cancer, just a little bit of false teaching. So John tells the church to turn those people away, saying, if these false teachers come your way, turn them away. Don't even bring them into your house, he's telling us in 2 John. Again, talking to the church, he's specifically speaking about teachers brought into the church, which most often were in homes in the early church. Don't even bring them into your house. This is not, however, a license to be unfriendly to lost people, okay? If someone disagrees with you, if someone has alternative opinions as your own, this is not licensed to say, oh, we got to turn those people away. He's talking about false teachers in the church. Special category of action we're to take against those that infiltrate the church with false teaching. Now, this is a good place to detour into 3 John, because you almost have to counterbalance 2 John with 3 John. The book of 3 John, also likely written to a church, but even more specifically to a leader of the church whose name was Gaius. If John's message in 2 John was to kick out false teachers from the church, his message in 3 John to Gaius is to receive and welcome itinerant teachers. Those are good teachers who traveled around spreading the gospel. Welcome them in. Be hospitable to them. And he, in his communication to Gaius, he then and praises him for his welcoming spirit and his hospitality. He then chastises another person in 3 John whose name was Diotrephes. He chastises him for not being welcoming, for not being hospitable. In fact, John accuses him of ignoring the instruction of the apostles, which is a problem in and of itself that's concerning. Then finally, he praises someone named Demetrius for saying he's well spoken of by everyone for being a genuine witness of the gospel, and John commends him to Gaius. That's 3 John, a rough outline of 3 John, but the basic outline of 3 John in summary is be hospitable to the missionaries that come through. That in counter-distinction to what he said in 2 John, which is kick bad teachers out. So you have one chapter, one chapter that's telling us kick out the bad teachers, and in 3 John he's saying welcome the good ones. But then again, back to 2 John, where he's telling the church to kick out the false teachers who are, going back to 2 John verse 7, listen to this, these false teachers are deceivers who have gone into the world, remember that phrase, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus in the flesh. That's the chief heresy here that he was addressing in 1 John. Such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist. Okay? Did you notice that? This is 2 John verse 7. Deceivers, plural, to such a one is the deceiver and the antichrist, singular. All right? And so that begs the question, does it not? Who is the antichrist? Or who are they, depending if you're reading in the singular or the plural that John identifies. In this verse, he used it singular, the antichrist, right? But you'll remember from our readings in 1 John, how does he use the word there, okay? Well, he uses the term antichrist 3 times in the book of 1 John. The first one comes in 1 John 2:18, then again in 1 John 2:22, then a third time in 1 John 4:2 and 3. You can look those up for a quick review if you want. Rewind that. That's, again, 1 John 2:18, 1 John 2:22, then a third time, 1 John 4:2 and 3. But what you'll find is that he uses the term antichrist both in the singular and plural forms. For example, let's focus on that first one, 1 John 2:18. Children, it is the last hour, and you have heard that Antichrist is coming, singular. So now many antichrists have come, plural. Therefore, we know that it is the last hour. So again, he uses both the singular and plural form here, but also notice twice he made reference to the last hour. Now, when you're talking about the Antichrist, stay with me here. We're going to get into the weeds here a little bit, but stay with me. I think you can follow this. When you get to talking about the Antichrist, it's important to first get your eschatology in order. That's a big word. What does it mean? In short, eschatology is the study of the last times, the end times, as it were. Now, if I were to ask you, are we in the last days? What would you say? What do you understand the last times or the end times to be? Are we in them now? The answer to that question is yes. We are in the end times. Now, some of you might respond to that by saying, yes, I know we're in the end times. Look at the latest headlines. Look at all the wars. The Lord is coming soon. These are the last days. Well, yes, but notice what John said in verse 18. We just read this. It is the last hour. And again, he says, this is the last hour at the end of that verse. The writer of Hebrews tells us in chapter 1, verses 1 and 2, long ago, at many times and in many days, God spoke to our forefathers by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he anointed heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. Okay? And again, there's mentions of it in 1 Peter 2, 1 verse 20. You can look that one up. 1 Peter 1:20. He references the last times. So you have to understand the apostles began referring to the last times in the first century. Okay, the last days began with, according to what we just read in Hebrews, the last days began with the advent of Christ, when he was made flesh. This is why John the Baptist said, repent, for the kingdom of God is at hand, right? In other words, it's here. It's here and you need to repent. He was telling the Jewish people. So that's the first thing we need to understand. The last days are now. The last days started with the advent of Christ and will conclude at the return of Christ. Eric, how can you say that these are the last days when we've been in them for 2,000 years or so? That's a long last day or final hour. That's a good question. I'm glad you asked that. You have to remember that redemptive history began taking place a lot longer, a lot further back than 2,000 years, right? Think of all the events in redemptive history that have taken place since the garden. When you think in those terms, perhaps it's not so hard thinking of Christ being the last thing. We wait on one more event in redemptive history, the return of Christ. So we're in the last hour. And in the last hour, a lot of things are going to happen. A lot of things are going to happen. And this is where you have to tie 1st and 2nd John to other books of the Bible to gain a little bit of clarity as to what he's talking about when he mentions something like Antichrist. Now, I don't have much time left. I'm trying to keep this brief, right? So I can't do a deep dive here, but if you beg me, maybe we can do a study over the summer. But as far as who the Antichrist is, let me give you a few leads to chase here. And again, maybe this will open up another opportunity for us to go a little bit deeper. But the first question I want to ask you, is the Antichrist one person yet to come? Or is he someone who has already come? Or maybe he's not one specific person, since John goes back and forth between singular and plural. Now, this is going to blow your mind here, so hang on tight. To answer that question, I think you need to go to the book of Revelation, right? That's another book written by the Apostle John. Written by the Apostle John under divine inspiration, of course. In Revelation chapter 12 and 13, okay? Revelation 12 and 13, John speaks of 3 things in particular that I'll call your attention to. 12 and 13. And again, I wish we could go deeper on these, but let me just scrape the surface. In Revelation 12:9, John speaks of a dragon, and he tells us who the dragon is. Again, this is highly symbolic language, apocalyptic language, and he speaks of a dragon, okay? And in Revelation 12:9, he says that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He says that's the dragon, okay? So you have a dragon who is Satan. Then in Revelation 13, you have a beast, right? And in verse 4, we're told that beast was given authority from the dragon, from Satan. So who is this beast? Again, it would take a few minutes to explain here, but for now, let's think of this beast as the antichrist plural, okay? The antichrist plural. Remember how John used the term both in the plural and singular. Think of the beast as the antichrist plural. If you read Revelation 13, you'll see that the beast has 10 horns and 7 heads. He's plural unto himself, okay? But then notice again in Revelation 13, down in verse 11, there's yet a second beast. It says it had 10 horns like a lamb and spoke like a dragon. Now, if I could pause there for 1 second. When the Bible uses imagery like this, you have to ask yourself, what does that imagery mean in other parts of the Bible? When you hear the word lamb, what do you think of? We should immediately associate lamb with Jesus Christ, right? So this second beast, John tells us in Revelation, looked like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon, okay? If I were able to describe to you what a false teacher in the church is, it's someone who looks a lot like Jesus and might even sound a lot like Jesus, but his words are really like a dragon because they deceive and ultimately pull people away from Christ. And I think that's what John is describing here, whom we might say is the Antichrist, singular, a person, maybe even that comes from inside the church. In fact, if I had to bet on it, will come from inside the church, but who will pull people away from the church because it sounds like, it looks like a lamb, but speaks as a dragon. He'll deceive the church, and many will falsely worship him. Now, side note, another string, tie another string from there. So we've gone from 2 John over to Revelation 12 and 13, and now we're going to tie another string over to 2 Thessalonians. Because in 2 Thessalonians, Paul tells us about a man of lawlessness, a singular man. He's not speaking symbolically here. This is not apocalyptic language. This is now Paul speaking in one of his letters. So tie a string there from Paul's man of lawlessness to the Antichrist in 2 John, and the beast, the second beast in Revelation 13. Has this person already come? Has this man of lawlessness, the singular Antichrist, the second beast, all those three, has that person come? I think maybe this is one person that we haven't seen yet. I don't think this person has arrived on the scene. I don't think so. Okay, going back to 1 John 4, verses 2 and 3. John speaks of the Antichrist. He says, which you heard was coming, and now is in the world already. Now, without putting too fine a point on that, I think he's talking about the first beast there, who might be embodied by rulers and governments of the world, both past and even present, who exist in a spirit of Antichrist, okay? And then again in 1 John 2:18, John speaks of an Antichrist that is coming. So again, he spoke of one that is already here, and one who is yet to come, who is coming, who embodies everything that first beast stands for, and one who deceives the church and leads them into apostasy. That sounds a lot like a singular person. Perhaps that second beast, or Paul's man of lawlessness, who he says in 2 Thessalonians will take a seat in the temple of God. All right? Now, what Paul is telling us is that man won't take a seat in the temple at Jerusalem. That's not what he's saying. He'll take a seat in the temple that is the church. That's the temple. In 1 Corinthians 3:16, Paul calls the church God's temple. All right? So again, this idea of a lamb that looks like a lamb, speaks like a dragon, someone I think will come from the church. So here's the best way to wrap this up. And again, this is a bit of an ominous way to end this study, I know, but do you now see why it's so important that we're able to identify good teaching from false teaching. That's the whole point here. That's the whole point here, to be able to recognize the fruits, to see the fruits, to understand the fruits. Why is it so important to test the spirits and evaluate the genuine from the sincere? No, not so we can lord it over people. It's so we can protect ourselves. If we walk in the light, if we follow Christ, if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we don't need to be frightened or concerned about dragons and beasts. John tells us these things as a means of protecting ourselves and each other. It's like he's telling us, stay in the Word, love one another, take care of one another, love each other. And when the antichrist or the spirit of antichrist is before us, we can stand firm because we recognize the fruits of the Spirit. We stand firm because we know Jesus, because we walk in the light as He is in the light. Let's close with this from 2 John verses 6 and 7. And this is love, that we walk according to His commandments. This is the commandment, just as you have heard from the beginning, so that you should walk in it. Walk in the light, my friends. Walk in the light. May God bless you. Enjoy your study in the Word.